My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 35 years old. Lauren, stop exaggerating. Your sister is already upset enough as it is. We're not leaving the reception for this, my mother said, her voice sharp and impatient through the phone while I lay curled on a hospital bed, blood soaking through the thin gown, fluorescent lights burning above me at 9:47 p.m. That was the last time I spoke to either of my parents. 7 years ago, I lost my baby that night, and I lost my family in the exact same moment. Not because of the miscarriage, but because of a lie. A lie my sister told so convincingly that my parents chose her version of events over the reality happening right in front of them. What I didn't know was that someone else had been there that night. Someone who didn't speak up at the time. Someone who watched everything unfold from the corner of that hospital room and carried the truth in silence for years. I just didn't know it yet. Not until my grandmother showed up on my doorstep last Thanksgiving with a manila envelope clutched in her hands and a look on her face I had never seen before. Before I take you back to that night, if this story pulls you in, take a second to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories. Only if you genuinely feel it. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now let me take you back to Chicago, winter of 2018. The night everything in my life split clean in two. But before we get to the hospital, you need to understand what my family looked like before everything broke, because nothing that happened that night came out of nowhere. I was 28, working as a medical assistant at a private clinic downtown, saving every spare dollar to apply to physician assistant school. I worked double shifts more often than I should have, drank coffee like it was water, and kept a planner so detailed it looked like a military schedule. I liked structure. I liked knowing what came next. It made life feel manageable. My older sister, Emily Whitaker, was the opposite of everything I was. Emily was 32, loud, charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new friends and a free drink. My mother, Carol Whitaker, adored her in a way that was never subtle. Emily wasn't just her daughter. Emily was her reflection, her pride, her proof that she had done something right. My mother posted about Emily constantly. Engagement photos, promotions, vacations, even things as small as brunch with friends. Every caption sounded like a campaign speech. So proud of my girl. My shining star. Everything I ever dreamed of. I don't think I appeared on her page more than twice in 10 years. My father, David Whitaker, was quieter. He worked in commercial real estate, left the house at 7 a.m. sharp, came home at 6:15, ate dinner without much conversation, and retreated to his office to watch cable news until bedtime. When my mother spoke over me, which she often did, he would glance at me like he wanted to say something, like he knew something wasn't right, but he never interrupted her. Not once. I used to tell myself that his silence meant neutrality. That he wasn't choosing sides. It took me a long time to understand that silence is a choice. That fall, I found out I was pregnant. 8 weeks. I remember sitting on the edge of my bathtub at 1:30 in the morning, still in my scrubs, holding the test in both hands like it might disappear if I blinked. The father, his name isn't important for this story, had ended things a month earlier. No argument, no closure. Just a text that said, "I don't think I'm ready for this kind of commitment," and then nothing. So there I was, 28, alone, and pregnant. And I decided to keep the baby. Not because it was easy. It wasn't. I ran through every scenario in my head, every financial spreadsheet, every worst-case outcome. But I also knew something else. I had spent my entire life handling things on my own. I could handle this too. The first person I called was my mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I said, pacing my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. A pause. Then, "Make it quick, I'm heading out." "I'm pregnant." Silence. Not warm, not surprised. Calculating. "Are you serious right now?" she finally said. "Emily's wedding is in 4 months. 4 months, Lauren. Do you understand what kind of stress this is going to cause? I stopped pacing. Just stood there. I thought you'd ask if I'm okay, I said quietly. Well, are you? She replied, already sounding distracted. Because I don't have time for drama today. I have a meeting with Emily at noon. I'm okay, I said, even though I didn't know if that was true. Good. Then keep it together. The last thing your sister needs is attention being pulled away from her right now. She hung up. That was the entire conversation. She didn't ask how far along I was. She didn't ask if I needed help. She didn't ask anything about the father. She asked about Emily's wedding timeline, and then she was gone. The only person who called me back that week was my grandmother, Margaret Hayes, my mom's mother. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city, the kind with a wraparound porch and wind chimes that never stopped singing. Lauren, sweetheart, she said when I picked up. I heard the news. Congratulations. Her voice was soft, steady, like something you could lean on. I don't know if congratulations is the right word, I admitted. It is, she said. You're bringing life into the world. That's never the wrong word. I cried after we hung up. Not because I was sad, but because it was the first time someone had said something that felt like support. I should have paid more attention to that. To who showed up and who didn't. But I kept hoping things would shift, that my mother would call back, that my father would say something, that Emily would at least acknowledge it. None of them did. At 13 weeks, everything changed. I was at home after a long shift, standing in my kitchen heating up leftover pasta, when the pain hit. Sharp, sudden, low in my abdomen, like something twisting where it shouldn't. I gripped the counter, waited for it to pass, told myself it was nothing. Then it hit again, harder this time, stealing the air from my lungs. I grabbed my keys and drove myself to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. By the time I walked through the ER doors, I could feel something was very, very wrong. There was blood. Too much blood. The nurse at triage took one look at me and called for a wheelchair. Everything after that moved quickly. Questions, monitors, a doctor explaining something about complications, about urgency, about needing to act fast. Is there someone we can call for you? The doctor asked. I nodded and reached for my phone. I called my mother. It rang 3 times before she picked up. I could hear music in the background, laughter, glasses clinking. Lauren, I can't talk right now, we're at the rehearsal dinner, she said. Mom, I'm at the hospital, I said, my voice shaking despite how hard I tried to steady it. They're saying something's wrong. I'm bleeding and I'm scared. Can you come? She exhaled sharply, like I had just inconvenienced her. Lauren, your sister is already stressed. Today has been a mess because of that situation you caused earlier. I can't just leave in the middle of dinner. What situation? I asked, confused. Then I heard Emily's voice in the background, loud enough to cut through everything. Is that Lauren? Tell her not to start anything tonight. I already told everyone what she did. My stomach dropped, not from the pain this time, but from something colder. What are you talking about? I whispered. My mother lowered her voice, but not enough. We'll deal with this later. Just try to calm down. You always make things bigger than they are. I'm in the hospital, I said, barely holding on. I might be losing the baby. There was a pause. Then she said the words I still hear in my sleep. You're not losing anything if you just take better care of yourself. Stop being dramatic. And then she hung up. I stared at my phone after the call ended, like if I just waited long enough, it might ring again and she would say something different. Something human. Something that sounded like a mother. It didn't ring. The room felt too bright. The sounds around me, monitors beeping, carts rolling, voices calling out codes, blurred together into a kind of distant noise that didn't feel connected to me anymore. I was there, but I wasn't fully inside my body. A nurse touched my arm gently. "Lauren, we need to take you back now." I nodded, even though I didn't feel like I was the one making that decision. They wheeled me down a long hallway under rows of fluorescent lights that all looked exactly the same. I remember staring up at the ceiling tiles, counting them without realizing I was counting, just to keep my mind from going somewhere darker. "Do you have anyone coming?" the nurse asked softly as we moved. I swallowed. No. She didn't say anything after that. She just adjusted the blanket around me and stayed close. That mattered more than I realized at the time. They explained what was happening, but the words came in pieces. Complication. Internal bleeding. Emergency procedure. We need to move quickly. I understood enough to know it was serious, but not enough to fully grasp what I was about to lose. "Lauren, we're going to put you under," the doctor said, his tone calm, practiced. "You're going to be okay." I wanted to ask about the baby. I wanted to ask if there was anything they could do, anything at all, but the words wouldn't come out right. They got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. A different nurse stepped beside me then. She had dark hair pulled into a loose bun and tired eyes that somehow still felt kind. "I'm Rachel," she said quietly. "I'll be right here with you." A stranger. A stranger was the one holding my hand when they put the mask over my face. "You're not alone," she added. And for a second, just a second, I almost believed her. Then everything went dark. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The empty kind. The kind that presses in on you from all sides. I blinked against the light, my head heavy, my body slow to respond. My hand moved instinctively to my abdomen, like it could confirm something my mind wasn't ready to accept yet. The doctor came in a few minutes later. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. "I'm so sorry, Lauren," he said. "We weren't able to save the pregnancy." There it was. Simple. Final. I nodded like I understood, like I could absorb something that large in a single sentence. But it didn't land all at once. It came in waves. The first wave was numbness. The second was disbelief. The third was something deeper, something that settled in my chest and stayed there. "Is there someone we can call for you?" he asked. I shook my head. "No." He hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say more, then gave a small nod and stepped out. And just like that, I was alone. No flowers. No messages. No one was sitting in the chair by the window. Just the steady beep of a monitor and the hum of the hospital air system. Hours passed. I'm not sure how many. Time didn't feel real anymore. At some point, a nurse came in and helped me sit up. Another brought water. Someone checked my vitals. They all spoke kindly, gently, but they were all strangers, and when they left, the room went quiet again. Around 1:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on the tray beside me. I looked at it for a long time before picking it up. It was my mother. For a moment, something small and fragile lifted inside me. Maybe she came to her senses. Maybe she realized. Maybe she was on her way. I answered. "Hello?" Her voice came through immediately, clear, composed, like she had been waiting for me to pick up. "I hope you're not planning to ruin tomorrow with this," she said. The words didn't make sense at first. "What?" "Emily is already upset," she continued. "She told me what you did earlier, showing up like that and causing a scene before dinner. Lauren, I don't understand why you always have to make everything about you." I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, trying to piece together what she was saying. "I didn't go anywhere," I said slowly. "I've been at work and then I came straight here. I'm in the hospital." A pause. Then, "Well, Emily said you came by the venue this afternoon and told people you were pregnant to get attention." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not true," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I never went there. She has no reason to lie, Lauren. That sentence. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not broke, not shattered. Shifted. Like a door quietly closing somewhere deep inside. I lost the baby, I said. I don't know why I told her. Maybe I needed her to hear it out loud. Maybe I thought it would change something. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she sighed. Well, maybe this is for the best. The timing was terrible. I closed my eyes. The silence stretched between us, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Full of everything that had been building for years. Every dismissal. Every moment I was overlooked. Every time I convinced myself it didn't matter. Are you even listening to me? She asked. I'm listening, I said. And that was the last conversation I had with my mother for 7 years. I hung up. I didn't cry right away. That came later. What I felt in that moment was something colder. Something clearer. Clarity. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital with a folder of paperwork, a list of medications, and instructions to rest. The nurse at the desk handed me my things and gave me a small, sympathetic smile. Do you have someone picking you up? No, I said. I'll call a rideshare. She hesitated. Are you sure? I'm sure. I stepped outside into the cold Chicago air, the wind cutting through my jacket, and waited on the curb like any other patient being discharged on a normal day. Cars passed. People walked by. Life moved forward like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed once while I stood there. For a split second, I thought it might be one of them. It wasn't. It was a notification. A social media post. I opened it before I could stop myself. My mother had posted a photo from the rehearsal dinner. Emily in a white dress, glowing, surrounded by friends and family. My mother stood beside her, smiling wide. The caption read, "Perfect night celebrating my beautiful daughter. So proud of you, Emily. Tomorrow is going to be magical." Over 120 likes. Comments filled with hearts and congratulations. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Not one mention of me. Not one acknowledgement of where I had been. What had happened? Nothing. That was when I understood something in a way I never had before. It wasn't just that they didn't show up for me. It was that they believed a version of me that didn't exist. One that was selfish, dramatic, attention-seeking. And they were comfortable with that version. Because it made everything easier for them. My ride pulled up. I got in, gave the driver my address, and leaned my head against the window as the city lights blurred past. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text anyone. I didn't go home and wait for someone to check on me. Instead, I made a decision. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Out of survival. By the time that car pulled up in front of my apartment, I already knew something they didn't. I wasn't coming back from this. Not in the way they expected. I didn't go back to work the next day. Or the day after that. I called the clinic, told them I had a medical emergency, kept my explanation as brief and clinical as possible, the same way I'd been trained to deliver difficult information without letting emotion take over. They gave me a week off, no questions asked. I think they could hear something in my voice that told them not to push. I spent those first 2 days in my apartment, moving from the bed to the couch and back again, not really resting, not really thinking, just existing in a kind of quiet that felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. The walls seemed closer. The air felt thicker. Every sound, the refrigerator humming, a neighbor walking overhead, a car passing outside, felt too loud in a space that otherwise felt completely empty. I didn't cry the way people expect. There were no dramatic breakdowns, no sobbing on the floor. What I felt was steadier than that. A low, constant ache that sat behind my ribs and didn't move. On the third day, I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, and realized something I couldn't unsee. Not one of them had called. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Emily. No one had reached out to ask if I was okay. No one had even sent a message. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't bad timing. It was a decision. And once I understood that, the rest became very simple. That afternoon, I changed my phone number. I didn't block them. I didn't leave the line open hoping they would try again. I closed the door completely. The old number was tied to a version of my life that no longer existed, and I wasn't going to carry it forward out of habit or guilt. Then I opened my laptop and deactivated my social media accounts. Every platform. Every connection. I didn't leave a note. I didn't explain. I just disappeared. The next step took longer. I went back to work the following week, but something had shifted in me. The clinic looked the same. The routine was the same. Patients came in, charts needed updating, vitals needed taking. But I moved through it differently, like I was observing my own life from a distance. I finished my shifts. I stayed late when needed. I did everything I was supposed to do. But in the quiet moments, I started making plans. 2 weeks later, I submitted a transfer request to a clinic in Columbus, Ohio. Smaller practice. Lower pay. Fewer hours. A place where no one knew my last name, where no one had ever met my family, where I wouldn't have to answer questions I didn't want to answer. When my supervisor asked why I wanted to leave, I gave her the truth, just not all of it. I need a change, I said. She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether to ask more. Then she nodded. Sometimes that's enough. Within a month, I was gone. I packed everything I owned into my car, signed a lease on a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, and drove 3 hours south without telling a single person where I was going. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Just gone. My mother called my old number. I know she did, because my grandmother told me later. She left messages at first, annoyed, then frustrated, then angry. "This is ridiculous," she apparently said in one voicemail. "She can't just disappear like this. She's being selfish." Selfish. That word followed me longer than anything else. Emily, from what I heard, told people a different version of the story. One that fit neatly into the narrative they had already decided was true. She said I had shown up at her rehearsal dinner uninvited, that I made a scene, that I tried to pull attention away from her wedding by announcing my pregnancy in front of guests. She said I stormed out when people didn't react the way I wanted, that I had always been unstable, always looking for ways to make things about me. And when I disappeared after that, it only made her story more convincing. Because in their version of events, my silence wasn't self-preservation. It was proof. Proof that I was exactly who they said I was. My grandmother was the only one who didn't accept it. She called my old number repeatedly until it stopped working, then called the clinic, then eventually showed up at my apartment in Chicago only to find it empty. She asked neighbors. She asked my coworkers. She asked anyone who might have seen me. But I had been careful. I didn't want to be found. At least, not yet. Life in Columbus was quiet. Intentionally so. I worked, came home, cooked simple meals, and went to bed early. On weekends, I walked through the same park near my apartment, past the same pond, the same benches, the same path that curved around a row of trees that changed with the seasons. I didn't make friends right away. Not because I couldn't, but because I wasn't ready. Every connection felt like something that could be taken away, twisted, misunderstood. It felt safer to keep things small. Controlled. A few months in, I applied to a physician assistant program at Ohio State. It had been my plan before everything happened, and I refused to let that part of my life disappear along with everything else. I studied at night, worked during the day, and slowly, almost without realizing it, I started to build something new. Not a replacement. Something different. 2 years passed like that. Quiet. Steady. Predictable. The kind of life I used to think was boring. The kind of life I now understood was peaceful. I got into the program on my first try. I remember opening the acceptance email at my kitchen table, reading it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, letting the reality settle in slowly. I had done it. On my own. No celebration. No family dinner. No photos posted online. Just me. And that was enough. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Because the truth is, there were moments, small, quiet ones, where the absence still felt sharp. The day I started the program. The first time I wore my white coat. The nights I stayed up studying until 2 a.m., wishing there was someone I could call just to say, "This is hard, but I'm doing it." I built a life I could be proud of. But there were gaps in it. Spaces where something should have been. I filled those spaces with routine. With work. With forward motion. And for a long time, that worked. Until the past found its way back to me. It happened on a Thursday evening in late November, 3 years after I moved to Columbus. I had just gotten home from a long shift, dropped my bag by the door, and was halfway through pouring myself a glass of water when there was a knock. Not a light knock. Firm. Intentional. The kind that says the person on the other side isn't leaving. I froze for a second, the glass still in my hand. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't have people who just showed up unannounced. The knock came again. I set the glass down slowly and walked to the door, my heartbeat picking up in a way I didn't understand yet. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing on the other side of my door was my grandmother. Margaret Hayes. 3 years older than the last time I'd seen her. 3 years more tired. Her gray hair pulled back loosely, her coat slightly too big for her frame, her eyes fixed on me like she had been holding this moment together for longer than she could manage. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said my name. Lauren. And everything I had carefully built, every wall, every distance, every quiet decision I made to protect myself, shifted all at once. For a moment, I couldn't move. Not because I didn't want to, but because my body didn't seem to understand what it was seeing. My grandmother wasn't supposed to be standing on my doorstep. Not here. Not in this life I had built so carefully, so intentionally separate from everything that came before. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice softer than I remembered, but steady in a way that told me she wasn't going to leave without saying what she came to say. I stepped aside without thinking. "Come in." She walked past me slowly, taking in the apartment with a quiet glance, like she was memorizing it. The small couch, the neatly stacked books on the table, the framed certificate on the wall, everything that made up the version of me she had missed. "You've done well," she said, setting her purse down carefully. I didn't answer right away. I closed the door, leaned against it for a second, then turned back to face her. "How did you find me?" She gave a small, tired smile. "You always were methodical." "It took time." That sounded like her. Patient. Persistent. The kind of person who didn't stop once she decided something mattered. We stood there for a moment, the air between us filled with everything we hadn't said in 3 years. "Are you okay?" she asked finally. The question landed differently coming from her. It didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like something real. "I am," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. She nodded, like she believed me, but not completely. "I was worried," she admitted. "You vanished." "I needed to," I said simply. "I know," she replied. And the way she said it told me she really did. We moved into the living room, sat across from each other, and for a few minutes, we talked about small things. Safe things. My job. Her house. The weather. The kind of conversation people have when they're circling something much bigger. Then her expression shifted. Subtle, but enough. She reached into her purse and pulled out a large manila envelope. The edges were worn, like it had been opened and closed more times than paper is meant to handle. She held it in her lap for a second before speaking. I didn't come here just to see you, she said. I felt it then. That shift in the room. The same kind of shift I had felt years ago in the hospital, right before everything changed. What is it? I asked. She looked at me carefully, like she was deciding how much to say at once. I was there that night, Lauren. The words didn't make sense at first. What night? She didn't look away. The night you were in the hospital. Everything in me went still. You, what? I was there, she repeated, her voice calm but carrying something underneath it. Something heavy. I saw everything. My first instinct was confusion. Then disbelief. Then something sharper. You never came in, I said. No one came. Her eyes softened, but she didn't look surprised by my reaction. I wasn't in the room the whole time, she said. But I was there long enough. I leaned forward slightly, my hands tightening without me realizing it. Why didn't you tell me? That question came out faster than I intended. Not angry, not yet, but close. She inhaled slowly, like she had practiced this moment. Because I didn't understand everything at first, she said. And by the time I did, things had already shifted. Shifted. That word again. What do you mean you saw everything? I asked, more firmly now. She placed the envelope on the table between us but didn't open it yet. I came to the hospital after your mother told me you were being dramatic, she said. She made it sound like you were overreacting, like you had gone there for attention. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. That sounded familiar. That quiet instinct that something was off. I got there around 10:30, she continued. I asked at the front desk for your room. They told me you were in surgery. My chest tightened. I didn't know that, I said quietly. Your mother didn't either, she replied. Not at that point. I frowned. What does that mean? She looked down at her hands for a second, then back at me. It means she hadn't actually spoken to the doctors, she said. She was going off what Emily told her. Emily. Even after all these years, hearing her name in this context still felt like pressing on a bruise that never fully healed. What did Emily say? I asked. My grandmother hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she did. She told your mother that you showed up at the rehearsal venue earlier that day and caused a scene, she said. That you told people you were pregnant in a way that embarrassed her. That you were trying to take attention away from her wedding. I let out a slow breath. That's not what happened, I said. I know, she replied immediately. But your mother didn't question it. Of course she didn't. What else? I asked. My grandmother reached for the envelope, opened it carefully, and pulled out a few folded papers. She hasn't handed them to me yet. She told your mother that you had been acting unstable for weeks, she continued. That you were overwhelmed, emotional, not taking care of yourself. That you had been exaggerating symptoms before. The room felt smaller. She said that when you called from the hospital, it was just another attempt to get attention, my grandmother added quietly. I stared at her. And you believed that? I asked. No, she said, firm this time. I didn't. There was no hesitation in her voice. I went there because I didn't believe it, she continued. And when I got to the hospital, I realized very quickly that something was wrong. I swallowed. What did you see? She exhaled slowly, like she was pulling the memory forward piece by piece. "I saw your mother in the hallway," she said. "Not in your room. Not talking to a doctor. She was on her phone, pacing, arguing with someone." "That sounds like her," I said, but my voice felt distant. "I stayed out of sight," my grandmother continued. "I didn't want to make a scene without understanding what was happening. So I listened." My hands tightened in my lap. "And?" Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. "And I heard Emily." The words landed heavier than I expected. "She was on speaker," my grandmother said. "Your mother had her on speaker. And Emily was telling her not to come into your room." My breath caught. "What?" "She said, if you go in there now, you're going to reward this behavior," my grandmother repeated. "She told your mother that you were fine. That the doctors had already said it wasn't serious. That you were exaggerating to make them feel guilty." I felt something cold move through me. "That's not true," I said automatically, even though I knew she wasn't questioning it. "I know," my grandmother said again. "And Mom just listened?" "She didn't answer right away. She hesitated," she said finally. "But Emily kept talking. Kept pushing. She said if your mother left the rehearsal dinner, it would ruin everything. That people would notice. That it would look bad." I closed my eyes for a second. I could hear it. I could hear Emily saying those exact words. The tone. The urgency. The way she framed everything like a performance that had to be maintained. "And then?" I asked. My grandmother's voice dropped slightly. "And then your mother made a decision." I opened my eyes. "What decision?" She held my gaze. "She decided to stay." The words settled into the room slowly, like something heavy sinking to the bottom of still water. "She decided to stay." I repeated it in my head before I let myself react to it, like maybe if I processed it carefully enough, it wouldn't hit as hard. It still did. "Even after she knew I was in surgery?" I asked. My grandmother shook her head slightly. "She didn't know yet. Not at that exact moment." I frowned. "Then why would she stay?" My grandmother didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the papers in her hands, then back at me. "Because she chose to believe Emily," she said. "And because leaving would have meant admitting that something serious was happening. And your mother doesn't handle situations she can't control very well." That sounded like the woman I had grown up with. Control was everything to her. The image, the narrative, the way things appeared to other people. If something didn't fit that image, she didn't adjust the image. She adjusted reality. "So she stayed at the rehearsal dinner," I said slowly. "Yes. And I went into surgery alone." My grandmother's expression softened. "Yes." The confirmation didn't break me. Not the way it might have years ago. What it did was fill in a space that had always been there. A gap in the story I had lived with, something that never quite made sense no matter how many times I replayed that night in my head. I had always assumed my mother simply didn't believe me. But this was different. She had been told something. She had been given a version of events that made it easier for her to stay where she was. And she chose that version. "What happened after that?" I asked. My grandmother shifted slightly in her seat. "I waited," she said. "I thought eventually she would come to her senses, that she would go into your room, talk to a doctor, realize the situation. But she didn't. She stayed in that hallway for a while, then she left." "Left?" "She went back to the rehearsal dinner," my grandmother said quietly. The image formed in my mind without permission. My mother walking out of the hospital. Getting into her car. Driving back to a room full of people dressed up, laughing, celebrating. While I was unconscious on an operating table. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. "And you?" I asked. "I stayed," she said. That didn't surprise me. I didn't know where you were at first, she continued. They wouldn't give me information without being listed as your contact, and I wasn't. But I wasn't leaving until I knew you were okay. Something in my chest tightened. Not painfully. Just enough to remind me that not everyone had walked away that night. It took time, she went on. But eventually I spoke to a nurse who confirmed you were in surgery. That it was serious. Rachel. The name came back to me instantly. The nurse who held my hand. The one who told me I wasn't alone. I waited in the hallway outside recovery, my grandmother said. 4 hours. I swallowed. Why didn't you come in when I woke up? Her expression shifted slightly, something like regret passing through it. Because your mother came back, she said. I blinked. She came back? Yes, my grandmother replied. After the dinner. That. I hadn't known. She came in late, my grandmother continued. Sometime after midnight. She went straight to the nurse's station, asked about you, and they told her the surgery was over and that you were stable. My mind tried to reconcile that with everything I remembered. I woke up alone, I said. I know, she said gently. Then where was she? My grandmother's fingers tightened slightly around the papers. She stood outside your room, she said. For a few minutes. I felt my stomach drop. She didn't go in? My grandmother shook her head. No. The word sat there between us. She looked through the window, she added. I saw her. I was at the end of the hall. She stood there, watching, but she didn't go inside. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Then her phone rang, my grandmother continued. It was Emily again. Of course it was. And after that call, she paused briefly, like she didn't want to say the next part but knew she had to. She left. I stared at her. She left the hospital? Yes. Without coming in to see me? Yes. I leaned back slowly, my body feeling heavier than it had a few minutes ago. For years, I had lived with the belief that my mother didn't come because she didn't think it was serious. But this. She had been there. She had stood outside my room. She had looked at me. And she still chose to walk away. Did she ever come back? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. No, my grandmother said. The room was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one was sharper. Clearer. And you didn't tell me any of this? I said finally. There was no accusation in my voice. Just a question that had been waiting for years without me knowing it. My grandmother exhaled slowly. I tried, she said. I went to your apartment the next day, but you were already gone. I nodded. That made sense. I asked your mother what happened, she continued. And she repeated Emily's version of the story. Said you had overreacted, that you were fine, that you had embarrassed the family. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I argued with her, my grandmother said. For the first time in years, I really argued. I told her something didn't add up. That I had seen things she couldn't explain. And? She shut me down, she said simply. Said I didn't understand, that I was making things worse, that I should stay out of it. Of course she did. And Emily? I asked. My grandmother's expression hardened slightly. She doubled down, she said. She insisted that everything she told your mother was true. That you had been unstable. That you had been trying to manipulate the situation. The word manipulate landed heavier than the rest. That's what she told people, my grandmother added. Not just your mother. Extended family. Friends. Anyone who asked. I let that sink in. They believed her, I said. Most of them did, she confirmed. I nodded slowly. That part didn't surprise me anymore. What's in the envelope? I asked, glancing at the papers she still held. She looked down at them, then back at me. This, she said, placing them gently on the table, is why I'm here now. I leaned forward slightly, my attention sharpening. What do you mean? She slid the top document toward me. It took me a long time to get this, she said. And I didn't want to bring it to you until I was sure. Completely sure. I looked down at the paper. Hospital letterhead. Typed text. Dates. Times. My name. My heart started to beat a little faster. What is this? I asked. My grandmother held my gaze, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything she had just told me. It's the hospital record from that night, she said. I felt something shift again. Not the same shift as before. This one felt different. More solid. Okay, I said slowly. She didn't look away. It shows exactly what happened, she added. I glanced back down at the paper, my eyes moving over the lines without fully processing them yet. And that's not all, she said. I looked up. What else is there? She hesitated for just a second. Then she said the words that changed everything all over again. Lauren, there's a note in there. The word note didn't sound like much on its own. Just a simple addition. A detail. But something in the way my grandmother said it made my chest tighten before I even looked down at the page again. What kind of note? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached forward and gently tapped a section halfway down the document. Read it, she said. I lowered my gaze, forcing myself to focus this time. The page was filled with clinical language at first. Intake time. Symptoms. Blood loss. Procedure details. Everything written in that detached, precise tone hospitals use to document things that are anything but detached. Then my eyes landed on a smaller section. A note added after admission. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower. Patient contacted family prior to procedure. No family present at time of emergency intervention. Patient appeared distressed. Nurse on duty reports overheard phone conversation indicating family declined to come. Additional note, elderly female relative present in hallway expressed concern and remained on site during procedure. I stopped reading. The words blurred slightly as my vision shifted. That's you, I said quietly, looking up at my grandmother. She nodded. Yes. I swallowed. They documented that? They documented what they witnessed, she said. I looked back at the paper, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge. They wrote that my family declined to come, I said. Yes. Not forgot. Not unavailable. Declined. The word felt deliberate. Clinical, but unmistakable. They heard the call, I added, more to myself than to her. They heard enough, my grandmother said. I leaned back slowly, my mind trying to absorb the weight of it. For years, my mother had told a story. Emily had told a story. One where I was dramatic, unstable, attention-seeking. One where I created problems and then ran from them. But this was documentation. Not opinion. Not interpretation. Record. And there's more, my grandmother said gently. I looked at her again. More? She reached into the envelope and pulled out another sheet, this one slightly different. This took longer to get, she explained. I had to request it through someone I know at the hospital. It wasn't part of the standard record. She slid it toward me. I picked it up carefully, like it might break if I moved too quickly. What is it? I asked. A report, she said. From the charge nurse that night. I felt my pulse pick up again. Why would there be a report? My grandmother held my gaze. because what happened raised concerns. I looked down at the page. This one wasn't as structured. It was more detailed. More human. I started reading. Patient arrived in critical condition with significant blood loss. Attempted to contact listed emergency contact, mother. Phone call was made in presence of staff. Tone of conversation raised concern regarding level of support. Staff noted patient expressing fear and requesting parental presence. No family arrived prior to procedure. I paused, my throat tightening slightly. I could hear my own voice in those lines, even though it wasn't written there. I was scared, I said quietly. I know, my grandmother replied. I continued reading. Approximately 1 hour post-procedure, individual identified as mother arrived at facility but did not enter patient room. Observed in hallway for several minutes. Left facility shortly after receiving phone call. No direct contact with patient occurred during visit. My grip on the paper tightened. She really never came in, I said. No, my grandmother said softly. I kept going. Secondary individual, elderly female relative, remained present in waiting area for duration of procedure and recovery. Demonstrated concern and requested updates from staff. No further family engagement observed. I exhaled slowly, my chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt heavier than before. That was you, I said again. Yes. I lowered the paper into my lap, staring at it without reading anymore. For so long, everything that happened that night had lived in this gray space. My memory on one side. Their version on the other. And somewhere in between, doubt. Not full doubt. I knew what I experienced. But enough to make me question certain details. Enough to wonder if maybe, in some small way, they had seen it differently. This removed that space entirely. There was no gray left. Just truth. They knew, I said finally. The hospital staff knew. They did, my grandmother confirmed. And you knew? Yes. I looked up at her, something shifting again inside me. Why now? I asked. It wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was a real question. She took a breath, her shoulders rising slightly before settling again. Because things have changed, she said. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? She hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because she was choosing how to say it. Your sister's marriage is falling apart, she said. That wasn't what I expected. What? Emily and Jason, she clarified. They've been having problems for a while, but it's worse now. He's starting to question things. Like what? I asked. Like the stories she tells, my grandmother said. I let that sit for a second. And my mother? She's still the same, she said. Still controlling the narrative. Still telling people you left because you couldn't handle responsibility, because you were unstable. That part didn't surprise me. She doesn't know I have these, my grandmother added, nodding toward the papers. I looked down at them again. Evidence. Proof. Something solid in a situation that had always been built on shifting versions of truth. And Emily? I asked. My grandmother's expression changed slightly. Not softer. Not harder. Just more certain. She knows what she did, she said. I felt that in a way I didn't expect. Not as anger. As clarity. And she's never corrected it? No. I nodded slowly. Of course she hadn't. That's why I came, my grandmother said. Because this doesn't just belong to the past anymore. It's starting to come back up. People are asking questions. I looked at her. What kind of questions? She held my gaze. The kind that lead back to you. The room felt different again. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just charged. And what are you expecting me to do with this? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. I'm not expecting anything, she said carefully. This is your life. Your story. She paused, then finished the thought plainly. I just didn't think it was right for the truth to stay buried any longer. I looked down at the papers one more time. The hospital records. The report. The note. 7 years of silence sitting in front of me in black and white. And for the first time since that night, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I hadn't just walked away from them. I had walked away from a version of the truth they controlled. Now I was holding the real one. And the question wasn't whether it existed anymore. The question was what I was going to do with it. I sat there for a long time after my grandmother finished speaking, the papers spread out in front of me, my hands resting on either side of them like I needed to keep them from disappearing. 7 years. 7 years of silence, distance, rebuilding, all sitting in that room with me in the form of ink on paper. I don't have to do anything with this, I said finally, more to myself than to her. You don't, my grandmother agreed. Her voice didn't push. It didn't guide. It simply acknowledged. I built a life without them, I continued. A good one. A peaceful one. I'm not sure I want to reopen any of that. That's fair, she said. I looked up at her. But. She gave a small, almost apologetic smile. But sometimes the truth doesn't stay contained just because we want it to. I exhaled slowly. I'm not saying you need to confront anyone, she added. I'm saying that this might come to you whether you go looking for it or not. That part settled differently. Not as pressure. As reality. We talked a little longer after that. Not about strategy. Not about confrontation. Just about what life had been like for both of us in the years in between. The kind of conversation you have when you're rebuilding something that never fully broke, just went quiet. Before she left, she placed her hand over mine. I'm proud of you, she said. The words were simple. But they landed in a place that had been empty for a very long time. After she left, the apartment felt quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet I had known before. This one felt full. Not with noise. With truth. The next few days, I didn't rush into anything. I went to work. I followed my routine. I made my coffee the same way, walked the same path through the park, sat at the same desk. But everything felt slightly different, like the world had shifted just enough for me to notice. I found myself thinking about that night in ways I hadn't allowed myself to before. Not replaying it out of pain, but examining it with something I hadn't had back then. Perspective. By the 4th day, I knew something. Not what I was going to say. Not how it would go. But I knew I wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. I didn't make a dramatic plan. I didn't rehearse speeches or imagine confrontations. I did something much simpler. I called my grandmother. Is there still a way to contact Pastor Miller? I asked. There was a pause on the line. Yes, she said carefully. There is. Can you give me his number? Another pause. Then, Lauren, are you sure? No, I said honestly. But I'm ready. She gave me the number. I didn't call right away. I sat with it for a few hours, letting the decision settle, making sure it wasn't coming from anger or impulse. When I finally dialed, my hand was steady. St. Mark's Community Church, this is Pastor Miller, a calm voice answered. Hi, I said. My name is Lauren Whitaker. There was a brief pause, not awkward, just aware. I've been hoping I might hear from you someday, he said. That caught me off guard. You have? Yes, he replied. Your grandmother spoke to me a few years ago. She shared some concerns. I glanced down at the papers on my table. I have documentation now, I said. From the hospital. From that night. I see, he said gently. And what would you like to do with it? The question was simple. My answer was too. I'd like to come by, I said. In person. You're always welcome, he replied. 3 days later, I was driving back into a part of my life I hadn't touched in 7 years. Chicago looked the same. Same skyline. Same streets. Same buildings I used to pass without thinking. But I wasn't the same person driving through it anymore. I didn't go to my old apartment. I didn't drive past my parents' house. I went straight to the church. St. Mark's sat on the corner just like I remembered. Red brick. White doors. A place that used to feel familiar and now felt neutral. I parked, sat in my car for a minute, then got out. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood and old books. Quiet. Still. Pastor Miller was waiting near the front. Lauren, he said, stepping forward with a calm, steady presence. It's good to meet you. I nodded. Thank you for seeing me. We sat in his office. I placed the papers on his desk, one by one. He didn't interrupt while I explained. He didn't rush me. He just listened. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful, not shocked, not reactive. I remember your mother's version of events, he said. She was very persuasive. I almost smiled at that. I'm not here to argue with her, I said. I'm here so there's a record of what actually happened. He nodded slowly. That matters, he said. I left the copies with him. Not as a weapon. Not as revenge. As truth. I didn't go to my parents' house after that. I didn't call them. I didn't need to. Because the truth didn't need volume. It just needed to exist in the same spaces where the lie had lived. A few weeks later, things started to shift. Quietly. Subtly. People began asking questions. Not to me directly at first, but to my grandmother, to others in the community. The story wasn't as clean anymore. It didn't land the same way it used to. Emily's marriage continued to unravel. I heard, through my grandmother, that her husband had started putting pieces together, that he didn't like what he was finding. My mother, from what I was told, became quieter. Not apologetic. Not accountable. Just quieter. And for me? I went back to my life. Not unchanged. But grounded in something I hadn't fully had before. Closure. Not the kind that comes from apologies or reconciliation. The kind that comes from knowing the truth, fully and clearly, without distortion. I still haven't spoken to my mother. I don't know if I ever will. With Emily, the door isn't closed, but it isn't open either. It's there, waiting, but it requires honesty to move, and I'm not willing to lower that requirement anymore. With my grandmother, we speak every week now. Short calls. Simple conversations. Real connection. And that's enough. Because I learned something through all of this. Something I carry with me every single day. Blood doesn't give someone unlimited access to your life. Truth does. Respect does. And consistency does. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to say thank you. And if this story meant something to you, take a second to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories. Only if you truly felt it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you just to protect your peace? My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 35 years old. I built a life that no one gets to rewrite for me anymore. And this was my story.